In the southwest corner of County Mayo, the coast road narrows between field banks and dry stone walls until it winds to a halt in the sands at the foot of Wheelrim Mountain. It's the ultimate in peaceful cul-de-sacs. In my first winter in Ireland, more than 30 years ago, I used to look across the bay from Connemara to this gleam of dunes below the mountain. I focused on it, all the young outsiders yearning for an unspoiled, secret place. It's played an odd part in our lives, obsessing us separately and together, like some echoing amphitheatre waiting for a pair of actors. For what use is one? For Ethna too, before she married me, it was a favourite, special place. I watch her now through the camera, out to fill a knapsack with seaweed for the garden. One thorn-edged acre of Tullaborn has been our homestead for more than 20 years, though it looked a lot bleaker than this when we moved in. We were switching from good jobs in the media, with a young daughter in tow, to try a simpler, more self-reliant country life. We wanted much less in our lives, and much more. Much less city hassle and complexity, much more freedom and beauty. Freedom to experiment, to manage our own time. Go for a walk up the hill when we felt like it. And every day to wake up in delight with where we were. For the first decade or so, through my Saturday column in the Irish Times, we found ourselves acting out other people's dreams of an alternative lifestyle. Milking goats, raising ducklings, making friends of hens. In this plan, the garden was of paramount importance. We needed big hedges to sift the wind. We built a greenhouse sunk in the ground and found efficient ways of growing vegetables. We go abroad on the land together, Bombus the bumblebee and I, dodging around each other on our separate affairs. Her deep, full-engine buzz is startling after the empty air of winter. In the pond, the scent of growing algae draws the frogs up from the mud to breed. Algae is food for their tadpoles. Grown frogs eat slugs and snails, which is why I made the pond in the first place. This mating game is called amplexus, and what looks like mud wrestling is really a sort of gang rape. The first seedlings of the year need a start in the greenhouse. As I stoop above modules of compost, sharing out the beans, I'm the ideal lyric listener, not going anywhere else. There are birds we watch for every spring, each in their turn, and make a note in the nature diary. The wheat here from Africa looks for rocks that remind it of the desert. And the shelduck arrives in time for the green weed in the channel. The shore is shared out between skylarks, and I lie in a hollow in the dunes and let my head fill with music. First light brings the dawn chorus, all the cockbirds in the garden proclaiming their territories. Even with so many trees to choose from, a chaffinch can make a mistake. If we could watch her building in a fork of the willow tree over the stream, then so could the magpie mobsters that moved in on the acre. Even with a cocked chaffinch to keep watch, the magpies just had to bide their time until there were eggs to steal. At dawn, with fewer eyes to see, a blackbird gathers straw for her nest. The magpie's predation is costed in, as it were, to the spring's accounting. One of the reasons why songbirds in particular are quite prepared to lay 2 or 3 lots of eggs. It's no use us getting angry for the birds, though of course we do. What a stunning blue the song thrush eggs are really. Some predators one doesn't mind so much. The professionals like this sparrowhawk. And who could hate the kestrel, helicoptering for frogs and field mice? It has to be the wood mouse, because the longer tail here and the big ears and the bigger eyes. Poor little thing. She wouldn't come indoors. So there are always diversions, but this sort of life allows for them. You go out to do one thing and end up doing half a dozen others. There's even time for sky gazing, which I do quite a lot. But some things have to be regular, on the dot, like measuring the rain each day at 9 for Met Éireann. 600 of us all over the island, marching out to the rain gauge in the lawn and measuring the millimetres since yesterday. One man kept it up for 56 years, but I've started a bit late for that. When there isn't any rain, I have to make my own. This is ravens' territory. Skulls, bones, the marrow of these boulders supervised from the upper air. That's from a poem by Michael Viney, who loves this place. And he's right about the ravens. Until the eagles come back, this is all their land. Sometimes they have terrible fights about it. The resident pair have been nesting on the cliff beyond the lake, in this disreputable basket of twigs. Ravens make a wild place even wilder. And even where we've tamed the West with bungalows, these are the birds that remember the contours of freedom. This well-fertilized perch has endured for years. Ravens also have some gruesome feeding habits, as the necessary vultures of the Dúach. An acre's not much land to own, but you can live on it if you have to, or want to, and if the soil allows. Our first crop of potatoes, huge, flowery and great for baking, made me realise what security a little land could give. There's not much they can do to you really, when you've got enough spuds for a year. The earlies go in by St. Patrick's Day, so I sow them beside hedge banks full of wildflowers. Nothing makes me feel more of a millionaire than their casual abundance beside me. Originals beyond price. I have a soft spot for the early dandelions. The first flowers of my life were backyard weeds, but here they don't look like weeds. Along the banks, of course, the dandelions are really hawkweeds, close cousins. But the real thing finds corners in the acre, and then when they seed, I might sneak up on them with a match. Bit silly, really. At low tide, the prow of an old wreck is like the finger of a sundial, or a distant figure leaning on the wind. Close up, it has a green mane of seaweed. When we first came here, there were rows of black ribs behind it, and I painted it once with fancies about the Armada or Granny Whale. Nobody knows the real story. But slowly the storms and scavenging tractors have pulled it apart, and bits of it are saved here and there, with holes where the wooden pegs were. The fox is always out ahead of us, hoping for some takeaway food along the tide line. And the otters come in from the sea, slipping up through the dunes to rest in a rabbit hole, or go on to the lake to wash out the salt from their fur. And yes, one did show up for our camera. Well, even the dog was holding her breath. This otter we met dead on the road. This is the way our life with nature goes, in glimpses. These are what you might call garden snails, Helix aspersa, which spend the winter clustered on a driftwood fence post in the dunes or in a crevice of the rock. They build their shells from lime in the sand, which in turn comes from fragments of washed-up seashells used by other sorts of molluscs. So there's nature's recycling for you. And on the right day in spring, usually a mild and misty one, they have an orgy in the marram grass. Snails are actually hermaphrodites, but they still need passionate and sticky embraces for reproduction, and they fire little love darts to turn each other on. Spring doesn't come all at once on the acre. It wakes up the trees one by one on some mysterious roster. We keep a record of the different dates and stages of bud burst for a scientist in UCD. The first swelling of buds, the first sight of green, the bursting and unfolding. We're in a little club of bud watchers, visiting our trees every morning, this is the sycamore, to track perhaps how global warming might be changing the way things grow. It's given us a special feeling for growth, just watching the same buds day by day for weeks, like chrysalises hatching out their butterflies. Such a thrilling green in the young beech. And the sticky buds of horse chestnut. Will it ever grow big enough for conkers here in the westerly wind? With a bit of shelter, you can make Eden within the rumble of the ocean. The frog spawn in the pond has been hatching out too. Each clump dissolves into 1,000 tadpoles, and their wriggling whips the water into a froth. Most of the tadpoles die in the first few days of life. They're one of nature's takeaway foods. And then a handful in every 100 will climb out as froglets to run a new gauntlet of beaks and teeth and claws. What I want a closer look at, apart from tadpoles, is one of their main predators, a creature that comes to a pond just to breed in spring. It likes a good wild jungle round the edge, and then it just appears from nowhere. There it is. I like newts. They have a gravitas, an air of purpose. You can look a newt in the eye. Eye of newt and toe of frog, two of the witch's ingredients in Macbeth. And this is the animal people often mix up with the newt. But the common lizard doesn't like to get its feet wet. The spring growth of plant life in the pond always takes us by surprise. One week there's clear water and reflection for the lady's smock, and the next the bog beans up and opening lovely sugar-pink spires like a water hyacinth. Dragonflies emerge when you're not looking. And Osmunda, royal fern of the bogs, unrolls bishop's croziers in a golden green that's like no other in the west. Every year the pond tries hard to become a bog, and there in the middle you might catch the eye of the last frog. Last November, the rams stopped kicking their heels in the rushes and were given their couple of weeks of full employment. That brings the first lambs in April, when the ewes have a chance of yearning with a dry fleece and milk in their udders from the new grass. There's a great stretch in the evenings as the sun swings north of Inishturk. These islands have meant a lot in our lives. A honeymoon on Clare Island, holidays on Boffin, camping as castaways with the seals and seabirds on Cahir and Ardilon. And who needs Ibiza with Inishturk in the kitchen window? As spring drifts towards summer and friends appear from the city, we can find the excuse for a trip. I sometimes wish we'd taken this last step to the west, to an island that doesn't need signposts, that once said no to a gold mine. Perhaps after all, in the days before the new island ferries, we were afraid of missing our city friends. But looking back, I've a feeling we did choose the best of all possible worlds. The house breathes gently. All the doors and windows open to whatever breeze there is. Raised up over the sea, we seem besieged by light, the very leaves as mirrors. But such leaves, so many. And flowers we never thought to see in the bare meadow we came to. We're temperate people, at home with the cool, moist and luminous, and made uneasy by Mediterranean days. I step out disguised as a peasant in the Mezzogiorno. This is a good day for hoeing. The weeds might actually die before the next rain puts their roots down again. And there's a certain sunlit perfection to everything growing around me. You could put these glossy vegetables in an art gallery, plants posing as themselves. Some weeds I leave to shade the soil and save its moisture. A blue-starred shawl of speedwell. A lace of fumitory. A cool dark fleece of dead nettle. Otherwise, nature is left with edges and margins, damp or dry as it suits them. When the road is widened, now we are rich, will anyone want to walk along it? When the new bridge comes in, will anyone pause for these? Or for this spreading tide of gold? Herbs from the old meadows crowd into our acres' untidy corners. We give the grasses, too, a chance to flower and seed, away from the silage mower. Even the grasses have names, old names like Coxford and Timothy, and Yorkshire fog with its velvety foxtail of flowers. Living near the shore in summer can give you delusions of the natural abundance on offer. All you need, surely, is a lobster pot and plenty of rope. Catching our supper like this was one of the excitements of our castaway holidays on the islands, where crabs and lobsters were almost queuing up. Today, if we're honest, it's more the idea of it, and having another excuse to play Robinson Crusoe in the coves beyond the Strand. Next day I come to haul the pot. Just as those island castaways found out on Channel 4, the sea can be stubbornly uncooperative. It's good we have generous friends. A heat wave in June can bring a drought. But as long as the stream keeps running to the sea, I can take my share for the garden with a clear conscience. The sweet corn soaks it up. By the world's tourism standards, these aren't, I suppose, all that many people or all that many cars, and then only for a few days in summer. I grew up in Brighton in the days when you could just find room to put your towel down on the beach. Still, it is a bit of a change for Tullibone. So, a paradise for a kite flyer, and very pretty to watch, but still not really our scene. But in this heat anyway, we prefer the empty strand of early morning. In the early sun, we can pick out the faint and feathery tracks of dung beetles, winding like Toy Town railway lines across the dunes. The sea pinks at the end of the strand are worth the whole walk. But in the lazy, hazy days of summer, all the action among the birds is going on out to sea. We love the aerobatics of the terns. And the recklessness of gannets. When the wind goes west again, it can round up every jellyfish between us and the islands. These are the common moon jellies, Aurelia, with their purple rings of sex organs. The compass, like an Art Deco lampshade. Cyanea, the colour of midnight, but packing a powerful sting. And once, for me to paint, came the wind-blown and deadly Portuguese man-of-war. Some fascinating animals live at the surface of the ocean. The violet sea snail, Janthina, has a shell so fragile it seldom comes ashore intact. It makes its own float of bubbles and drifts along, hanging upside down, and meeting its jellyfish food by mere chance. Watch for long enough and you'll find it, the ultimate in sea urchin beauty, worth a whole windowsill of lesser specimens. One thing I'd quite like to see is the way spider crabs make great heaps of themselves underwater in order to molt their shells in safety. By the time they come ashore, they're beautifully textured with barnacles. Brilliant algae made this one beautiful, but they soon fade. Spider crabs have their monsters too. Growing serious food means planning ahead for winter and planting hardy crops. Leeks are an ancient Irish vegetable, part of the medieval food rent that you had to grow for your local chief. And whether you like your vichyssoise cold in summer or hot leek and potato soup in winter, this is the way to grow leeks with the long white stalk that every cook looks for. total humidity, a dead sort of warmth. Half a day of this and we got potato blight weather. Paranoia about blight is one of my eccentricities. Viney out with his sprayer again when nobody else is bothering. But blight has sneaked up on me once or twice. It's shocking, like getting leprosy. The familiar white butterflies are homing in to lay their eggs on anything that smells of cabbage. A bionet keeps the plants growing fast and shuts out the pests without toxic sprays. No caterpillars in our calabrese. Butterflies go anywhere for nectar, but lay their eggs on special food plants. Peacock, red admiral, tortoiseshell. All these lay their eggs on nettles, and we've plenty of those. After sunset, when the birds have gone to roost, the moths take over the garden, and we'd like to know more about some of their species. A single light on a dark hillside like this is especially effective, and on a warm night in July could bring hundreds and hundreds of moths, which isn't really what we want. We can let them go again when we've had a look. With 1,600 to choose from, it needs quite a sharp eye to find out what you've got. There's the antler moth and the angleshade from the pattern in the wings, and the magpie, almost black and white. The old lady in her beautiful brown shawl. The rosy rustic's caterpillars eat my potatoes. And the dark arches. I think if I designed fashion fabrics, I'd find all I needed in the wings of moths. Once you start really looking at insects, it's a whole new world of infinite variety. My fumbling friends, the bumblebees, have several different football jerseys when I can be bothered to sort out all their stripes. Longhorn beetles like eating the pollen of flowers, so why not roses? As for midges, there's a lovely Connemara name for them, fistigruffs, but it doesn't make me like them any better. It's easy to respond to beautiful, dramatic things in nature, like water lilies and dragonflies. But I like meeting scientists who have a perfectly good reason for spending days searching for species that don't seem to have a lot going for them. Killian Roden here is a botanist from Galway, and he thinks the lake might have a rare kind of stonewort, an underwater plant that covers itself in lime and can smell rather fishy.
Well, it's covered in charophytes. They're very common, mainly the type that grow in these sort of sand lakes, and there are a number of species of potamogeton and a little plant called zanicella.
When we take to the water, which we used to do quite a lot, it's to catch fish with the spillet in the edge of the sea. We have to set the spillet at one low tide and retrieve it at the next 12 hours later. So it's quite a long trudge across the strand with the anchors and buoys on my back. The line with its 50 hooks is coiled up in the bucket. We tie one end to an anchor and then stretch it out along the sand, a few yards from the tide's edge. There's a hook at every fathom, or 6 feet, or 2 meters, so we don't set the spillet or anyone's likely to go swimming. The bait is strips of mackerel, which can attract the gulls. So to sink the line where the gulls can't reach it, I take it out beyond the third wave and push the anchor down into the sand. There are gannets fishing further out, but they're no threat to our line. And then, while Ethna holds up the middle of the line, I trot back to the other end and take that out to anchor it, with the hook stretched out between. Not all mornings are as radiant as this, and the line has to be lifted whatever the weather. The first haul of the summer is so often a disappointment, as the resident dogfish swoop in on the baits. However you cook it, dogfish tastes like what it is, a small and squirmy shark. Another darker dawn. Was it worth getting up for? Yes. We have turbot and flounders and a plaice or two, and not a dogfish in sight. Our maze of fuchsia windbreaks, barbered every month or so to keep them thick and vigorous, carve out quadrangles of summer calm. I used to think that fuchsia was too alien a shrub for Irish birds to nest in. But that was wrong. The hedges are let out in flats. The garden becomes a nursery of little birds, waiting for the next worm or chasing their mothers to be fed. Such workmanship, all for one season. A sudden explosion of baby wrens, all in one family. I wonder, have they missed this one? And there's a robin in the kitchen again. Only a new one. Yeah. Everything's so young just now. It makes me feel quite middle-aged. It's time we had our summer party. A pair of poets join us for a bean feast at Lunasa.
Lovely.
Very touched by your poem about gathering the mussels down at Davros, because that's what I used to do.
That's right, Derry Inver.
That's right.
I learned a very good mussel recipe, doing much less at a time in a shallow pan, not in a big saucepan, with oil and stuff, and get everything piping hot before you put the mussels in. You must do that, do you?
Yep.
Little dash of wine.
Yeah,
I love it.
A dash of wine and pepper and garlic.
Wait for them
and
to
lemon.
open and that's it.
That's fava is the Italian for bean.
I think what I really love about this place is the scale. And then the way the scale gives way to details, and then the way the details open out again into implication. And for instance, there are the huge and humbling passages of the birds, and then the spring tide coming in to change the landscape completely, and all the tiny little flowers have to adapt to this precarious, changeable environment. And my appreciation of the beauty and rareness and wonder of those plants was the length of time it took me to find them.
You something like that.
That's lovely, yeah. That's lovely. Mine is slightly different. It is a question of scale. I live in the shadow of a mountain, and sometimes that astonishes me. I mean, I've been cutting fuchsia bushes in order to see the mountain, so as I can actually walk in the window and be right in the living room with me. You know, that sense, and that scale. I think there are two kinds of home, by the way. The given home and the chosen home. The chosen home seems to be Renville, seems to be Tully, seems to be the small cottage, absolutely in the lee of a mountain with the sight of a lake and a long road up to a road on which people are coming and going all the time, and within bawling distance, basically, of a village. I love that. I love the mixture of the absolutely everyday with the strange, the numinous, and the possible. You know, in the landscape. That's always there.
In Tullaborn, our months and seasons slide into each other. But almost from the first day, September is not August. A tangible quietude settles from one day to the next. The summer people have driven off over the hill, leaving the last spiral of their tire marks on the strand. We wait for the big tides of the equinoctial moon to rub the sand clean of summer and wipe out all the marks that don't belong. The silence restores to us all the normal sounds of the hillside. The rumble of a tractor in the boreen, the swoop of the school bus, become local and noteworthy again. Even the ravens seem determined to take back the sky, their spiral gathering in all the summer's young. I like the Scottish name for swallows, chitterlings. It's so right for their discourse on the wires at the gable. They treat our garden as a stopover on the way south. Everything comes in flocks now. Young starlings have been swooping around in gangs since July, and now they're teaming up among the sheep on the Durch. And from the shore, as curlews gather, the very voice of autumn. A great river of migrant wings flows down around Ireland. The waders keep to the shore, but beyond them are the outriders of a huge movement of seabirds streaming south, like these gannets, fishing as they go. The migrants leave us behind, and a certain contentedness sets in as we repossess the landscape. Not everyone likes a wild landscape, but I think there's something deep in us that needs it, that speaks to us from way back when we knew how to live with nature. But for a lot of our history, what was thought beautiful in the countryside was evidence of fertile soil and human effort. Fields of cattle, stooks of grain. The rest of nature seemed ugly and threatening. Then the Romantics arrived, and the landscape painters. And this was the sort of thing they taught us to like. This great, empty lawn, by the way, is a rare kind of landform called mucker, a grassy plain of sand behind the dunes. The sea used to run here, and this was an ancient promontory fort. The poet Michael Longley wants his ashes scattered here, and I think I might join him. This is Carrigskewan, the Rock of the Ferns, and beside the lake, below the cliff, is what's left of the hazelwood where my daughter came looking for hobbits. The ferns of Carrigskewan are the little polypody kind, hand-sized and many-fingered. Scientists come here too, looking for rather unlikely things. This sandy, marshy corner was always a great place for snails. More than 50 species of them, including some rare and tiny ones from Ireland's primal past. Dr. Evelyn Wilkins came to check on 2 of them for Duchess and found them both gone, trodden into extinction by the sheep. The garden, meanwhile, is under a final siege from helicopter squads of cabbage butterflies. Their caterpillars hatch in October, and like any conscientious organic gardener, I sling 'em over the hedge. But back the other way come grapnel lines of bramble shoots, tossed over the boundary hawthorn as if by some invisible army. Invasion is clearly on the cards, for each slender green briar dropping to earth takes root at its tip, and next summer it will arch on again and again. If we all bailed out of Ireland, these are what would take over, 70 sorts of blackberry cloning themselves into thickets. In the macho culture of the western countryside, picking blackberries is not really a man's job, even outside his own gate. But being born English, I'm allowed to be a bit of a wimp. In autumn, nature starts putting its life into storage. Enough queen bumblebees will find holes in the field banks to start new nests next year. Enough butterflies will survive their hibernation to dazzle the birds in spring. Luckily for us, the germs of life stored up as seeds and fruit will keep us going as well. Why buy apples from halfway across the world if you've room for a tree in the garden? These are Worcester pearmans, the first of the season. How many people, I wonder, have never seen a pea in its pod, or a bean that isn't in frozen slices? You'd be surprised what you can grow once you've shelter and some sun and a good big freezer. Some things you can leave in the ground until they're wanted. And some take over half the garden for the summer, and then, all in their own good time, store up their seeds and a few tough and tasty squashes, just so that I can quote Keats about the season of mists and mellow fruitfulness. The full harvest moon of autumn rises colossally over the ridge and stirs great oscillations in the sea. The big spring tide at the equinox gathers at the channel's mouth, and piling up above its sandy corrugations, surges landwards in a flood that knows no taming or end. It picks up sea drift that has rested on the strand since spring and sweeps on up the channel to lift the swans at the furthest corner of the reeds. It spills across the grass of the Durch, erasing the otter runs and the nesting hollows of the summer larks, and joining the lakes in a mirror of silver water. In the wake of this inundation, Meg and I set forth, dislodging the heron from his fishing beat at the channel. There's a sharper feel to the autumn strand, a sharper sound to the waves. They give me hope of a different crop of beans, this time from the tropical West Indies. Well, perhaps one now and again, arriving at the top of the tide after more than a year of drifting. Finding one of these beans used to be thought extremely lucky, and still is in terms of chance. I should be training Meg to sniff them out. Just occasionally, too, there's a West Indian coconut, a real one as it were, just as it fell off the tree. The big brown glossy beans, Entada gigas, have fallen from the huge pods of a tropical liana more than a metre long. They're things you just have to hold. And this one's the horse-eye bean, very well named. I think I might have enough coconuts. Once you've drawn one, you've drawn them all. And then, if I'm allowed a botanical boast, there's this first tropical box fruit, Barringtonia, ever recorded in Europe. I picked it up on Inish Key, Mayo's own sort of desert island. The low end of the spring tide transports us to the bottom of the ocean. Well, a lot further down than we normally see. Here are masses of tiny mussels tied down with threads of silk, and their predators, the dogwelks, 1,000 eggs in each yellow capsule. Beyond them, the canopy of the kelp forest peeps above the surface. The big laminaria seaweeds that shelter so much of the life below tide, and break some of the force of storm waves before they reach the shore. At Emlock Point, you can see wave power confronted by a thrust of dark siltstone 400 million years old. This is sculpture in slow motion, hammered out atom by atom in an eternity of swirling water. A flood like that can leave us high and dry, sweeping out the pipe that brings our water from the hill. We've been meaning to do a more permanent job, but somehow it slips away from year to year. There's a certain Stone Age satisfaction to heaving rocks around in a stream. Just being so close to the running water leaves you feeling good, as if you breathe in some of its energy, some of its life. Autumn brings other jobs in the stream, hacking back the fuchsia on the banks in the hollow, scrubbing the bridge clean of algae that can make it so slippy in winter. If you were a fly in the hedge these mornings, It must seem as if the whole sky is strung with silver rigging. The gossamer at the lake is a horizontal maze, like the aerial defences on Andromeda. The hooper swans fly in for winter in late October. 3s and 4s and half dozens on the final stage of their journey from Iceland. Their necks are long to send their calls great distances. The sound is like a flugelhorn that composers use for the wistful bits, a concerto for hooper swans. Their calls will echo off the cliffs all winter, until the swans fly north again. We bought an eel net in the early days, when we were still giddy with all the things we were going to do. We remember it sometimes in the quiet of autumn. Eels like rubbing against things, so when they meet the net, they slide along it and turn into one of the traps, which leads them on through funnels. That's the idea, anyway. And then you go home and dream nice watery dreams. Even 1 or 2 would be nice. We're not greedy. And that's what we've got by the look of it. Eels, I should warn you, are a bit hard to kill. And not all that easy to skin either. Is smoked eel worth all that trouble? Well, absolutely. Now and again. In the infinite family of fungi, the most interesting and vivid, even some of the best to eat, live in the autumn woods. Right across Europe, whole families go out with baskets to search beneath the conifers, the birches, the oaks. In Ireland, we've been raised to like our mushrooms white and call all the others toadstools. We've yet to learn which of them are safe to eat, or even worth gathering. Half the fun, of course, is just being there, among the oaks at Old Head or Brackloon. We're hoping for the chanterelles and seps of the cookbooks, but find ourselves among fungi you wouldn't sit a puka on. Every year we think we'll remember what things are, but always end up in a session with the Encyclopedia of Mushrooms. Lactarius piperatus. Meaty but coarse. Red squirrels like it. Our autumn colour is soft and discreet. Shades of your grandmother's wallpaper as the bracken starts to rust. In Brackloon Wood, it takes an outsider, an American oak, to remember the brilliance of Vermont in the fall. The bogs are misted with pinks and madders, and grasses bleach out to the colour of lions. The beech in the garden lights a bonfire of its own. Glen of Rowans with scarlet berries, with fruit fit for every flock of birds. That's an ancient Irish poem. Country lore has it that a lot of berries means a hard winter, but that's putting nature the wrong way round. The buds that made the flowers that made the berries were all fixed 2 summers ago. Just in case, however, we'll follow the suburbanites in hanging out the nuts. We live in the shadow of a mountain. In winter, Wheelwray gets closer and bigger, or that's the way it seems. In summer, the light overpowers it and bleaches it out with a blue haze. But as the sun moves lower, the mountain fills more of the sky, and the hillside and its small farms settle back into its shadow and protection. The bald king is back on his throne. The ridge above us has no name of its own, even though it humps its back to almost 1,000 feet. It's there to help anchor the mountain, and we call it by townland names. Corrawallia on the far side, Six Noggins on this. Underfoot, it's a dull, windy limb of a hill, its contours empty of anything but effort. A steady plod beyond the wall, over sedges and soggy moss. And then a final staircase climb to a height where the bog splits open in multiple lacerations of rain and wind. Unless you have sheep, you have no business going up there. But at that height over the sea, there is of course the view. What is it that sends us panting up to the earth's high places for the mere command of distance? Perhaps we're still looking out for predators or prey, like a stoat on a wall, or a bear on its hind legs. The first touch of sun these mornings spills out from the Killery like gold from a crucible, lighting up the Creggans at the shore, and then the great flat lawn of the Macher and the dunes beyond. It's all very wild and primal looking, especially if the swans are flying. The winter brings fresh life and colour to the lichens on the rocks above the tide. Stone walls are all of a piece with the rock that breaks through the land at every turn. These have withstood Atlantic gales since before the famine. In Tullaborn, the stones to build a wall have been rolled down in the stream. The trouble is, there's nothing in their shape to keep a wall together. Other places have slabs of limestone or granite, with a gritty tooth to hold rocks where you put them. A neighbour called these dog's heads, and he's right. A hawthorn hedge takes patience, which nobody has these days. So these lone thorns are left to make winter silhouettes, not really bent over by gales, but shaped by the steady withering of their shoots on the windward side. For little birds, a thorn makes a safe cage as the winter sun goes down. Other creatures have their secret winter places. I have a rendezvous to go bat watching with Cape Mackinac.
This is a lesser horseshoe. They are found from Mayo through to Galway, Clare, Limerick, Cork and Kerry along the west coast of Ireland.
When it comes to winter hibernation, bats need a safe place with a steady temperature in which to slow their heartbeat and save their energy reserves. We think first of natural underground caves, but here at the back of the mountains, an ancient copper mine lets the bat sleep on undisturbed.
It's very easy to miss them if they're, hiding in there. In winter time, when they're hibernating, they fold the wings right in like a cloak around the body, and sometimes all you can see is just a little bit of the nose.
Living in this landscape and a bit closer to nature, it's easy to pick up a certain Stone Age respect for the cycles of moon and sun. At the winter solstice before Christmas, I visit an ancient stone alignment on a hill outside Louisburg and wait for the sun at noon to line up with a cairn on the ridge behind our house. Well, maybe next year. In the weeks coming up to Christmas, I'm saddened to see a tangle of holly cut for shops. Shall I find some favourite tree in the hills reduced to a stump? You need country dark to get the full message of candles in the townland windows. At the Millennium, there were never so many candles. And even a few fireworks around the corner in the bay. Such a sense of a world out there, beyond the mountains, beyond the sea. And we never felt so sure of our luck in being here and not there.
Here's the weather system which is going to bring us all that bad weather, already bringing lots of rain across the country. The winds increasing on the west coast as we speak.
The winter storms bring an occasional Arctic visitor, like this glaucous gull fighting the wind. When the power goes, as it must occasionally in a land of leaning ESB poles, we resort to ancient pleasures.
R-I-G-H-T.
A storm leaves the landscape still shuddering and excited. At the strand, the grains of sand have been shuffled again, and the scouring gale has left shells and stones perched on little stems of sand, like mushrooms. Among them are little plaques of slate, embossed with intricate hieroglyphs, affixed by tube worms at the bottom of the sea. They're what the worms live in, and the stones have been washed ashore attached to seaweed. Over several winters, I have armoured the living room chimney breast with these decorative undersea doodlings. A long run of westerlies hustles flotsam across the Atlantic. A scattering of plastic buoys, lost by the huge foreign trawlers in the deeps just over the horizon. They are hard as billiard balls, bright as party balloons, irresistible. Some of the floating debris arrives wearing all the signs of a long journey. This has been colonized in transit by gooseneck barnacles. Fish boxes and milk crates from the New World become our patio furniture. The days are long gone when Spanish trawlers mislaid green glass buoys like this string I once found on a Connemara shore. And this big beauty found on her own strand. These plastic novelties are fluorescent light sticks used by Florida fishermen to attract tuna, squid and swordfish. Coastal erosion is a perfectly natural thing, a way of letting the land soak up the sea's fierce energy by shuffling the sand and stones around. But the last 10 years of storms have brought changes to our shore that seem to go beyond this ageless balance of forces. Here at the end of the dunes, this high cliff is dramatically new. The storms have bitten down to their oldest layer of sand, now almost as hard as the rock beneath. In a decade, they have clawed away a century of sand. In this raw wound of erosion, there are strange lava flows of petrified sand, compressed by weight and shaped by water. The collapse of the dunes isn't all due to global warming or rising sea levels. On a shore like this one, there's a more or less fixed amount of sand that keeps shifting about between the dunes, the strand and the seabed. Shell sand has been used on the land for generations, but today's machines can take it away on a much greater scale. When sand disappears for use on the land, the sea makes up for the loss by biting more strongly at the softer bits of the coast. And here, some of the sand comes back, delivered gently in calm weather by a friendlier sort of wave. Winter brings a natural toll of seabirds that I'd rarely get to meet otherwise. This fulmar's a bit disreputable. This shag has hit some oil by the look of it. And here's a nice smart oyster catcher. This mortuary patrol is also a way of keeping tabs on what's happening among dolphins and whales, for which our waters are supposed to be a sanctuary. I won't say I always count a common dolphin's teeth, but there are times when the dental score is crucial to getting a species right. The rarest whale I ever found had just 2 teeth right at the tip of its jaw. Cetacean bones are beautiful. Every bit of a dolphin seems tailor-made for speed, for flying through the water. You never hear of a dolphin with a slip disc. When you've forgotten the tape measure, the sole of your welly is 1 foot long, give or take a centimetre. This pygmy creature got me quite excited, but turned out to be just a baby pilot whale. This whale skull came from Loop Head, and this bone from our own strand. Every now and again, the strand disgorges another piece of sculpture for the garden. This vertebra came from the tail of a huge animal, perhaps a fin whale or a sei, or even the sperm whale that washed up here half a century ago. It's heavy, but I'm having it. It will sit beside this one from the sperm whale and gather moss. This isn't an African war shield, but the carapace of a turtle. It came from an old and very dead tropical loggerhead that floated in one August. This is what's left of a baby loggerhead I found in a bay in Connemara. And very much rarer from this shore was a Kemp's Ridley from the Gulf of Mexico, now pickled in a jar in the Natural History Museum. These grey seals are very much alive and roosting on a rocky point a little way north of Tullaborn. It's well away from people and nobody disturbs them. But their own curiosity brings them swimming at safe range, inspecting a solitary human with the solemn regard of a black Labrador dog. The lichens on rocks and walls tend to hug their surfaces, but in a moist winter wood like this old Atlantic oak wood in the bay, the different lichens grow luxuriantly. This leafy lichen called lungwort is unusual to see. It needs the purest of air. In this wood, even the mosses scale new heights. Meanwhile, there are winter jobs in the garden. Building raised beds has been part of the system, piling up the soil for extra depth and bringing the weeds a bit nearer for pulling. Loppers make pruning the apple tree easy, if I don't get too carried away. At this point of rest in nature's year, it's an act of faith to get out the seed box, the new catalogues and order forms, and map out the year's sowing programs. It's also a comforting ritual, for no one who engages seriously with seeds can end up too gloomy about the future. Glorious goldfinches. Perhaps I should really be growing my own sunflower seeds, or peanuts in the greenhouse. The winter light picks out the old lazy beds, spread like a quilt across the hillside, and dotted with piles of stones collected from the ridges. Until the famine, there were 300 people in 50 cabins on this hillside. Then came a Scottish laird who leased the mountains for his thousands of sheep. He lived across the hill in Duloc Pass, where his wife found the weather depressing. In her book, 20 Years in the Wild West, she wrote, "Day after day, as regularly as morning broke, the same scene presented itself, or rather the absence of scene. For the rain, like a huge white curtain, hid even the outlines of the mountains from our view. Alternations, and very frequent ones there were, of storms and whirlwinds. Mrs. Boswell Houston put up with it in this house because she said, "It's not good for men to live near towns." They should all be out bird-watching. At Runelach, north along the shore, I inspect the cruising flotillas of waterbirds, totting up their numbers for somebody else's eager computer. Shelduck, cormorants, widgeon, and lapwings from Europe, ticked off in tens. When we first came, our city friends said, "Might be all right in summer, but what about the winter?" Well, what about it? It's beautiful. "23 years on, and we still call each other to the window."